I didn't come to Jesus through thinking about a lot of cultural issues. I come to the cultural issues because I'm thinking a lot about Jesus. So who is he? Is he who he said he was? And if he is, that would change things.
Welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast, friend. This is your host, Janelle Wood, and I am so grateful you are listening in for season 7 of the podcast, where we talk with different young women who have questions about the Christian faith. We hear their stories, we hear their objections or their questions, and then we invite some Christian guests on here to talk with them or talk with me about their questions. And today I'm really grateful because I have my returning co-host, Noelle, who definitely brought some great questions to the podcast. Before I reintroduce her, here's a little snippet of something she shared on a previous conversation. Take a listen. Where are you with the Jesus thing? Where are you in terms of him?
Also, with a lot of personal thought and introspection and whatnot, and being a biology major, I think has had a little bit to do with it too. I just like don't believe in him. um, it just
At all? Like that he was a historical figure at all, or just in the resurrection, or what?
I just kind of have a hard time believing that it's real, like that it even happens, or that it's like I don't know. I kind of am able to separate myself from it and view it as an
Mhm.
object rather than something that I truly think about and believe. Um, and I feel like it's
Mhm.
hard to try and convince myself that he is real or does exist when I like don't believe that. I just don't. Um, yeah, and that's just because of how I am, I guess. My life experiences and
Mhm.
what I've thought and the conclusions that I've come to on my own. So yeah.
Yeah. If he is real, would you want to know?
Huh. Yeah, for sure. I think so. Um, yeah, this guy is great. He died for our sins. He's selfless. He's done these good deeds, and like if he really does love us unconditionally and he does exist, like that'd be awesome.
Mhm.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And I don't see any problem with hoping that
Yeah. Well, then,
or yeah, even believing it.
well, you came to the right place because we're going to try to answer that question, right? All right, Noelle, welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be back.
How are you doing?
Doing great. Yeah, it's been a busy week, but it's Friday today. It's good.
That's right.
Looking forward to a restful weekend.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that too, but I'm also really looking forward to this particular conversation because something you said in that very first time we talked, you said to me, and this was kind of towards the end of our conversation, you said, I'm not sure Jesus was even a real dude. Like maybe these stories are just kind of made up. And would you share a little bit more about that? Because we have a guest here today to talk about those things, but I'd love for him to hear from your mouth where you're coming from.
Yeah. I've heard from some people that their interpretation of the Bible is a little bit um kind of divided. Like I've heard that some people like really do believe that the Bible is a historical book written about true events that have happened. But then others that have kind of used it as like more of a guide on how to behave and how to live your life. And so it's just kind of interesting to think about whether this guy actually walked the earth or if maybe he was just more of a like symbol for how to behave and how to be a better Christian. So yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we're I think that's really good. Thank you for sharing all that. And I think we're going to have a really good conversation today because I told you in that first conversation that I knew somebody that I'd love to invite on Guess what? Sometimes dreams happen. The dream guest is here. J. Warner Wallace, no pressure, is a Dateline featured cold case homicide detective. He's a popular national speaker and best-selling author. He continues to consult on cold case investigations while also serving in various capacities for different universities and schools. He's a faculty member of Summit Ministries. Jay Warner became a Christ follower at the age of 35 after investigating the claims of the New Testament Gospels using his skill set as a detective. He eventually earned a master's degree in theological studies from Gateway Seminary. That's all I'm going to share, although I could share a lot more.
No, it's too much already. Thanks for having me. It's way too much already.
Welcome back to the Finding Something Real podcast.
Well, I'm glad to be with you guys. I'm looking forward to it. So glad to kind of engage the same issues, to be honest with you, that I had myself for many, many years. I wasn't raised around. I didn't even have someone like you, Janelle, who was a family member who was a Christian that I would have been able to approach on these issues. It just didn't have any Christians in my family, but those are important questions. These are a great opportunity to talk about some of these things today.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. And you weren't really interested in Christianity based on the Christian witness that you saw around you either, Jim, if I remember right. Didn't you have some criminals you were putting away who professed Jesus and
Well, I mean,
kind of found that hard?
there's times when you're thinking to yourself, look, I see some hypocrisy in people who call themselves Christians. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I get that, because you probably haven't seen these guys doing bank robberies, but I did. They would tell me after I take them to jail. I remember watching a guy do a bank robbery in Long Beach here in Southern California, and got him in custody. It was a short pursuit. got him, crashed the car, got him in custody, and was bringing him to jail. And his whole ride back was his telling me about his conversion story. I'm like, really? Yeah, it sure is helping you, right? I mean, here you are doing bank robberies. Anyway, but so I think that I also saw stuff that I thought was just not. I wasn't interested. The people I knew who were Christians couldn't defend it, or they were the people who were taken to jail and they couldn't live it. If you can't defend it, you can't live it. Why would I care about it? That was really my view for a lot of years, and I was pretty vocal about it. We would tease these, well, as we would say things behind their back. Let's put it that way. You know, we had no respect for these folks. If I'm honest with you.
Yeah. Did you have anything in your life too where you were like, yeah, I wouldn't want to ever convert to Christianity because I like my life right now and it would mess with it?
No, to be honest, I'm very careful not to think that of people who aren't believers. Like, oh, you're only not a believer because you want to live this lifestyle you're living. No, I mean, I didn't have something. I had a pretty straightforward. I mean, there was things that I disagreed with Christianity for sure. I mean, my background before I became a detective, I don't know if you even knew that, but my bachelor's degree is in the arts. It's in fine art. My master's degree is in architecture. The life I was living before I became a police officer, before I became a Christian, was very, very different, and my views were very, very different. And it wasn't that I've been in the same relationship with Susie since we were teenagers. She was 15, I was 17. I never felt like nothing needed fixing. Let's put it that way. I just had this pastor provoke me by saying that, and it wasn't, we had our kids in preschool, and in preschool, a lot of times is run by Christian churches. If you Google preschool, you'll probably find most of them are in your community, or at least a lot of them are going to be Christian churches. And so we had our kids in a preschool, getting them ready for kindergarten, and it happened to be Christian, but I'm not interested in that. But I didn't thought, what's a preschool? So when they started school, I think Susie was like, well, should we continue? Like, they've been in preschool in a Christian set. Should we continue this? And I thought, so I drug it out for like 3 years. But when she finally got me to at least take a look, let's go see what this is about. Neither one of us were Christians. Let's go to a church. And I sat in that church. That pastor said that Jesus was smart, the smartest man who ever lived. And I thought, I don't think so. I mean, you think about all the ancients that have said something, written something, provoked something in culture. Is Jesus really the smartest of those? So that's why I bought a Bible, just to see what this guy thought was so smart about the teaching of Jesus. And that's really so it wasn't like I was looking for something or trying to debunk. I wasn't trying to prove it wrong either. I didn't really think it was, I kind of thought it was like every other ancient who says something wise. Like, who cares? But as I read through the Gospels, you have to do something with this guy. You got to figure it out. Did this stuff happen? Did he really live? Can I trust what's been written about him? This is like every cold case. This is like every set of eyewitness accounts. This is like every claim that's ever made by a suspect or a victim. You got to figure out, because not everyone's telling you the truth. As a matter of fact, in any set of witnesses, or suspects, there's at least one liar in there. I got to figure out who the liar is. So I just took that approach to the Gospels, and that's really what got me in. What got me started looking at it. I mean, I think that, I often wondered too, did this guy really live? Now I've read, there are other ancient sages, Baha'u'llah, the Baha'i faith, Muhammad, if you're a Muslim, Buddha, whatever you might think. Okay, so the question is, did any of these people really live? Or is there just that there was a simpler version of that dude, and that the religions have amplified that version and exaggerated that version until here we are today with this version of Jesus? I just needed to know if any of those things were true. So that's what started me in the whole thing.
I'd love for Noelle to share her thoughts on that, because I know that Noelle is an artist as well. And I know there was something that resonated in her when you shared that too. So go ahead, Noelle, anything.
Yeah, I love art. Art is so amazing, and it's art is like a wonderful form of communication. And for me, like spirituality and like like kind of a meditation type. It's very calming, and yeah, I love it. And I love that you studied art. That is so awesome. Is there a reason that you didn't continue it in your life?
I'll tell you why. It's very stupid and practical. I was working in one of the best architecture firms in Santa Monica, California, surrounded by true artists. Sometimes architectural firms can be more engineering like, or very
Mm.
practical. Not necessarily. There's not necessarily the principal of the firm is not necessarily an artist. But Charles Moore, who I was working for, he really was. And Buzz Udell, Moore Ruby Udell was the firm I was working for. And I just really felt like I was in this great place. But as I looked around, Susie and I had been together by that time about 7 or 8 years. And I just didn't see anybody else who looked like us. I'll just put it this way. If I had become and followed my artistic passions, and I have, I mean, all my books are illustrated. I illustrate them. All my presentations on stage are entirely visual. I do that because that's just who I am. But I can tell you this, if I'd have stayed in the arts, I would have worked 80 plus hours a week and getting paid for 40, just because, if someone tells you, hey, an extra 20 hours on this project, it's going to have your name on it. It's your art. You're going to do it, and you're on salary. And so there's no overtime in there. And I just thought, man, I would never be home. And my dad was a cop. And I can tell you the first, I'd say 8 or 9 years, 10 years, maybe on the job, I just didn't fit. I never felt like I fit in law enforcement. I could do it. Heck, I was the honor cadet of my academy class, but I just couldn't, it's not creative. And it wasn't really until we started doing cold cases in front of juries and I got to visualize the case for the jury that I got to scratch that itch. So I actually ended up in law enforcement for very practical reasons. Also, I'm not a good entrepreneur. My parents divorced when I was very young. My mom was dirt poor. We were poor growing up. And I was always afraid of being broke. And that fear keeps me from being entrepreneurial. So I worked in a civil service job. You don't make a lot of money, but it's steady. You get a pension. It's safe. And I think from somebody who didn't have a net under me, I needed to have a net. And it felt like of these, I think I'm gifted more as an artist, but I'm fearful enough. I'm just being honest with you that I think I'm better where I had this a guaranteed income, every 2 weeks. And as sad as that sounds, that's really what drove me to law enforcement. And I think but it's all providential if you think about it. I ended up then making visual cases that led me to where I am now writing books. I was getting to scratch that creative itch. So that's really how I ended up. But I totally understand where you're. Look, the art. I'm passionate about the arts, and here's what I discovered. I don't know if you've ever I've been to Europe a couple of times with my wife, who was born in Germany, and when we would go, we would visit museums and castles and churches, because the architecture and the art that's hanging there is phenomenal, especially some of these Baroque churches that are in southern Germany. And I just had really never, I just never stopped to think about, and maybe you haven't either, but if you look at the history of art, starting in the Common Era, all the isms, the expressionism, impressionism, Dadaism, popism, go all the way into the moderns. If you were to just look at every ism, because that's typically how we look at art history, right? As a series of isms. And if you were to look at all those and then to search in your own resources for the top 3 artists in each historic period, then look at their catalog. I kid you not. Here's what you're going to find. The top 3 artists in every historic period of art history in the Common Era have all imaged, painted, sculpted, crafted, drawn, etched Jesus of Nazareth. He has inspired more artists than any other single historical figure. So I have no doubt. The question for me is not whether Jesus really lived, because even a skeptic like Bart Ehrman, who is not a Christian, agrees and makes a case publicly, even wrote a book on he lived. The question for me is this version that we see on the pages of Scripture reliable? Because I didn't think it was. So that was really, for me, where the line was in the sand. But it turns out that I was in a profession, I was in a discipline, the arts. I was also a musician. I played in garage bands growing up. Thought I was going to be the next, superstar on a lead guitar. Of course, how stupid was that? But the point is, Jesus has actually had the same impact in the Common Era in music. So I just think that for me, it's kind of, sometimes it's the thing that's staring you in the face, but it also speaks to his historicity, right? Because you will not find another fictional character in the history of fictional characters that has ever impacted the arts or music or literature in the Common Era like Jesus of Nazareth. So even if all I had was that data, I'd say, well, probably he lived. The question is this version him?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a lot to hear, but yeah, like first of all, I want to say that um like totally, and being an artist is like it's hard to have a secure income and be like confident that you're going to be able to provide for yourself and your family.
Yeah.
And that's a very real thing.
That's one of the reasons, Noelle, why I ended up going to a master's degree in architecture. I came out with my bachelor's in fine arts, and I thought, how in the heck am I going to support Susie consistently with this degree in the arts? And I thought, okay, well, I could be a graphic artist. I mean, I'm trying to figure out how do I take this and be able to do it? And creatives don't want to be limited by the need for income. Like, I don't want to take jobs that don't fit my creative shape. Right. And so I thought, well, so what's the father or the grandmother or the mother of all arts? It's probably, architecture is a place where I thought, well, maybe I can make a living as an architect. Well, that was a 3-year master's program at UCLA. I mean, I was 128 unit master's, and I was like, oh my goodness, but I thought, well, I've got to do this. And I was probably in it about a year when I realized, yeah, you know what, this is not, I'm not entrepreneurial enough. But I finished because I wanted the master's degree. But then I graduated from UCLA on a Sunday. I was in the academy at the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department on a Monday morning, the following Monday. So I didn't waste any time. I needed to figure out how am I going to. We were married. I had a baby coming. I thought, we gotta do something here, So that was a lot of what drove me. But yeah, I get that. But I think if you were just to look at the person of Jesus, just from the lens of his impact on art and music, at least it leaves me scratching my head. Right. If you look at okay, there is no other fictional character that's had this kind of impact. And there is also no other true historical human being who's had that kind of impact. I mean, I just challenge anybody to tell me who it would be. And so as I look at that, are the 3 possibilities that he's either just a fictional character, or he's just some dude, or he is who he said he was. Only the third one seems to me to be explained by just his impact on art and music. So I'd like, okay, so but in the end, I didn't test. That's not how I tested the Gospels. That was just a small part of a bigger case. I needed to know, were they written early enough? Because a lot of witnesses will tell you that they saw something when they weren't even there. This is how you test an eyewitness: four legs. Two, were they can they be corroborated in some way? I don't expect them to be like a video corroboration where every minute detail is corroborated. I get that, but I should see some. Three, did they change the story? Have they been moving the story around? Have the goalposts been moving for these people? And four, do they have some good reason to lie to me? Like, they're motivated. They get something out of it if they lie. So these are the four things that I was kind of looking at. And I was pretty skeptical. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to back up for a second. I'm going to have to unplug my headset for a second. Hang on 1 minute. I have here, here it is. So when this pastor provoked me to look at Jesus as, in terms of, is he really the guy who impacted history the way that he said he did? I bought a Pew Bible and I kept it. And here it is. This is it. It's just like a $6 Pew Bible. You see these in pews of churches all the time. They're not much to it, but I put tabs in it because I started to really examine it forensically. And I started using what's called forensic statement analysis on the Gospels. So for example, in the Gospel of Mark, you're looking at deception indicators, optional words. I say this all the time. I'll say it to you too. Like if I told you that this is my, every word matters, especially adjectives and adverbs. So if I said, this is my black clicker, okay, I'm telling you something. And if you read it carefully, look at the adjectives and adverbs. This is my black clicker. This tells you I have more than one clicker. Because why would I use the optional word black? Don't need it. You can see it's black. But I'm telling you, this is my black clicker. I must have a different colored clicker someplace. So if you start looking at optional words, you can often read something that's not really intended to be spoken, but it actually is, especially from bad guys. Okay. And you put it in different color categories. Optional words, adjective, adverbs, expressions of pronouns. Did I use, he's a great guy? Or do I start changing the way I describe him? Do I ever use his name? Do I not use his name for a certain reason? So these get different colors. And so as I was going through the Gospel of Mark, I started kind of researching it forensically and just kind of looking at every optional word. And I'm looking to see, is it telling me something true? Well, I got done with it. I kind of felt like I was stuck with this guy, whether I liked it or not. I mean, here's what it comes down to. If this guy is who he said he was, it changes everything. You know people right now who you think are smart, they're wise, and they're influential, and they're powerful, and they can actually influence the way you think about certain things. I've met them. A lot of my professors I felt that way about. And I ended up adopting their views on most things because I thought they were smart and they were influential. And then you meet someone, and then suddenly the person you're dating, you think, oh, I could change some of my views because I think this person is powerfully influential in my life. So it's possible for other beings in your life to influence the way you think about certain things. Well, if this is who he says he is, if this is the being that is the creator of everything, he's going to influence the way I think about things. Because the gap from me to another human that might influence me is pretty small. We're both humans. But the gap to me and the creator of all things would be huge. So if he says to me, hey, you know what, jump. If I've discovered that he is who he said he was and he says jump, I'm going to probably say how high, how much, how many times? Because we're influenced by other beings in our own life. So it turns out if he is who he said he was, he's going to have the most influence on me in terms of my thinking. And that really started me changing the way I thought about a lot of things. But I didn't come to Jesus through thinking about a lot of cultural issues. I come to the cultural issues because I'm thinking a lot about Jesus. So who is he? Is he who he said he was? And if he is, that would change things. And every other issue would be downstream of who is this guy?
Yeah. That's really awesome. And I like that you said that because I think I have heard that before, talking with Janelle about like if he is real or if God is real, it's like the most important thing in our lives. And if he's not, then he's not.
Yeah.
And that's that. And I really admire that way of thinking about it. And that's really cool. And to go back to what I totally forgot I was saying mid-sentence. I am not a Christian, but I love like religious artwork and religious music, or maybe not religious music, but music inspired by either Christianity or other, because it is so important in our culture and our society. Like, no matter what, if you believe in God or you don't, Christianity is around. Christmas, Easter, we got lots of important people who are Christians. And so yeah, it influences all of us. And it just kind of, I guess it depends on how you take it, and how it's presented to you. Um, and yeah, hmm, let's see.
So when
It's
you say how it's presented to you, Noelle,
yeah.
what do you mean?
So I think I told this story on a previous recording, but when I was at my church summer camp, there was a man talking to us, and they'd brought him in. He was like a guest pastor,
Mm,
and he's telling us a lot about like phones and idols, and like how we shouldn't idolize things that aren't God, because that's not what he wants for us, which is understandable. But he also kind of brought in a lot of his own personal life, which is a cool way to teach people, but not a cool way to explain something you're trying to tell people as fact, or as something
mm,
you're very sure about.
yeah.
Um, and I was like maybe 12. So he's talking to a room full of 12-year-olds and younger, um, about like these like kind of subtly political like remarks. And I picked up on it, and I was like, that, why are you telling me like that it's very good that men go and like shoot guns, and like kill things, and that's like a big show of masculinity, and also like Christianity, just because they're, I don't know, the way he explained it to us was like, these god-loving men go out and hunt and kill and shoot big AR guns, and they're just so awesome. And I was sitting there like, I hate guns. I don't like this. I don't like what you're telling me, and this is also not in the Bible. Like, why are you saying this to me and all of my friends, like, as if it's the truth? And
Mm-hmm.
I've felt that way elsewhere too. And I just feel like the way that pastors and people in charge at church tend to skew it however they want to. Um, and as a kid, someone who is older than you and supposed to be like smarter and knows more is telling you these things, why wouldn't you believe them, right? Like,
Sure.
why wouldn't I think that shooting guns at animals and whatnot is like a great way of being a man? I don't know. So it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way, and I was like, this
Sure.
is not something that I want to continue hearing,
Mm-hmm.
um because I really really don't agree with that, and I feel like I'm being lied to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things about that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, of all the kind of isms in art, what is your favorite? What is the one that the style or the period of art history that you think, wow, that was really a great, love that period of art history? What would you say is your
Wait.
favorite?
Oh. Um. Oh goodness. I'm in an art history class right now. I'm actually really really into Dada,
Mm-hmm.
and
Dadaism. Okay, great. This is great. I know
yeah,
exactly where
yeah.
you are. I know exactly what you like. Okay.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this: of all the forms of like music you listen to on your Spotify playlist, is it pop music? Is it country music? What is it? What's the genre you think you probably listen to the most that you like?
Mm, maybe like rock.
Okay, so I'm like you. I've got favorites in certain things. I even like
Yeah.
certain sports better than other sports. But have you ever seen
Mm.
someone who is painting or doing something in that Dadaist movement that just sucks at it? Or like a rock band that, yeah, it's in the genre of rock and you love it, love rock, but this band sucks. I mean, I see this all the time. And the
Yeah.
fact that this band plays it really poorly does not stop me from still liking the genre. The fact that this painter is terrible at this doesn't dispel me from my passion for that genre of art. You know, I used to officiate football for high schoolers in Pop Warner when I was in college, all the way through grad school. I love football. I love football. I love the structure of the game. Okay, I get it. You may hate it, but I'm just saying, I like the game, right? So I would watch it, and I would see some of the worst players in worst teams because they're little kids. They're terrible. They're being coached by their dads. They're just terrible. But it didn't dispel me of my love for the sport. So here's what I would say is that yes, you will always have people in a genre of art who are terrible at it, or in a genre of music that are terrible at it, or in the Christian family who are terrible at it. You can have someone who plays Beethoven terrible. Doesn't mean that Beethoven's bad. Just means they play it badly. And so the same thing happens here. We often will find ourselves listen. That's why I dropped out of space into the Christian faith. I had no background in it at all. I didn't grow up in it. Never went to a camp at the age of 12. Don't care about any of that stuff. And when I got here, I looked. The only thing I thought that was a definitive model for the church was the early church in the Book of Acts. And I looked around and I said, "Why are we doing church this way? I don't see it on the pages of the Book of Acts." I finally planted a church in my house because I just wanted to do church without a protocol, without camps, and I've spoken at camps. Don't get me wrong, but I get it. So I think what for me, I kind of look at it and say, yes, there's no. But by the way, this is not just true for the Christian worldview. There are people of every worldview who give their particular worldview a bad name because we're just fallen humans. The problem with all of these worldviews, every institution, is that it is populated by these nasty, dirty little things called human beings, and we're a mess. And we are all capable of the worst atrocities. I am too. Believe it or not, everyone on this screen is capable because that's just the nature of who we are. And it's not just that the Bible describes it that way, that's what the data describes. And if you work cold cases, you'll discover this because every guy ever worked killed his wife 30 years ago, but it's been great for the last 30.
Mm.
So it's just we're able to cover up stuff really well. That's just who we are. So I think in the end, I try not to. I want to know. I don't care about how church is, and I have a very low bar for church. I don't mean this in a sarcastic way because I have a pretty robust interactive life with the scriptures. Like I'm going to the source for the data. I tell jurors all the time, do not trust my opinion or the opinion of any expert witness that we drew. That's great. You can consider it, but you get to be the final judge. You as jurors get to make the decision. And I want you to return to the evidence in your deliberations. That has the opinion is not evidence. Opinion is opinion. So I constantly try to go back to the evidence in the scriptures to form my Christian worldview. And I would encourage you too. This is a journey, and it's not a journey for you listening to pastors. If I said to you, "Hey, I want you to really spend some time investigating Christianity," well, that would not be listening to me or other pastors. It would be let's open up translation that is accessible. Let's start reading because it turns out this is the data upon which we're basing everything. And I think it's important for us to return to that data. Again, the upstream question is Jesus who he said he was? Not, does this guy hold a set of values that I disagree with? Or does this pastor, teacher, is he a jerk? Or that's not the issue. Those are all downstream issues. The upstream issue is, who is this guy?
Mm.
Because it turns out that I got to return to scripture as my authority. I don't have another guy on planet Earth who's my authority. It's scripture that's my authority. So that's, I think in the end, that's why I want to encourage you. Yeah, this is you're look, here's the other thing. I think we have a tendency sometimes to say, well, that's good for you. I'm glad for it. Good for you. Well, okay, there's lots of truths that are just a matter of opinion. There are. White cars are the best car. That's based on my personal subjective opinion. That's called a subjective truth. But if my car is white, well, that I can't change that by changing my opinion. That's grounded in the object known as the car. So that claim is an objective claim. It's not because I can't change it with my opinion. I could change my opinion. Green cars are the best car, and all of a sudden now for me, for you, good for you. Your subjective opinion has changed, but the car is not going to change color. That's grounded in reality. The claim that Jesus is God, it may not be true, but it's not a subjective claim. I can't change it. I can't make it so by willing it. I can't keep it from being so by willing it. It's either true or it's not true. By the way, once you discover a claim is objective rather than subjective, the only thing left to do is determine if it's true or false. That my car is white. Well, really? Let's go see. I can determine if that's true or false. That's all that's left to do. So here for me, this is why I would say, look, this is why Janelle's probably told you the same thing. It's not that Christianity is true. Oh, good for you, Jim. Good for you, Janelle. No. This is an objective. It's not a subjective claim. Like cheesecake's the best dessert. No, it's an objective claim. It's either true or false. If it's false, you should walk. Don't give it another thought. Mm-hmm. But if it's true, that's the upstream thing. Who is this guy?
I have a couple of questions for you. A couple times Noelle has said in the course of our conversations, right? Like you can never really know for sure. So I'd love for you to speak to that. And then Jim, why do you think it wasn't just a bunch of like a conspiracy theory, a bunch of made up stories? Noelle, are those good too? Two good questions there?
Yeah.
Got 9 minutes to do this. Okay. The fastest 9-minute version of this. Okay. Yes, it's true. You can never know for sure. That I don't get into percentages for sure. Here's what I know. That no claim about reality, no worldview has the complete evidence set you would need to eliminate doubt. As an atheist, I believe the entire universe was the product of chemistry and physics acting on space, time, and matter. But I cannot make that case completely because the evidence is lacking. I can get close. I can get close, but I can't make a complete case. This isn't just true for Christian. That's also true for Christian. In other words, we ask jurors all the time, are you the kind of person who can make a decision even though you have unanswered questions? If they say, no, I really can't render a verdict if I have unanswered questions, I'm going to excuse you because there's no way I can use you. I've never had a case where I could answer every unanswerable question because he hasn't confessed to me. I don't know how he did it, why he did it, sometimes where he did it, but I know that he did it. So what I will say is I'm going to follow this evidence chain with you. It's going to point right to that guy. Not a foot to the left, not a foot to the right, but it's going to stop short of all the way because that's where your unanswered and my unanswered questions are. I'm going to ask you to go to the evidence trail, step across the end. That's called rendering a verdict. Same thing true here. The evidence is very, very good, strong. It points right to Jesus, not a foot to the left, not a foot to the right, but it's short of the goal, and those are where your unanswered questions lie. And I'm going to ask you to take a step across your unanswered questions like you would have to do for every other thing you think you know. You're going to go right now and probably drive to work. You're going to put your key in the ignition. You have no idea how that car works. You don't even care. Cars blow up every day. People put their keys in the ignition and the car blows up. That could happen, but you're still going to turn the key. You're going to turn the key in your lock in your door to get in the house tonight. You have no idea how tumbler locks work. I don't either. But we don't need, those are unanswered questions. We can still act. We do for every single other thing we do every day. You don't know how paint pigmentation works. I don't either. I don't know what makes this red and why it doesn't change color over time when I paint with it, but I still use it. We have so many unanswered questions about the things we take for granted every day. Now, here's the question. Can you act with unanswered? I think you can. This is just one of those areas where most people will say, no. Yeah, I might act with unanswered questions in every other aspect of my life, including my relationships. But I could never decide. Why? This is the nature of decision making. You've never made a decision in which you had complete information, ever. It's just not possible. There's always some question I could level against anything we think we believe. Now let's just shift quickly because now we're down to 4 minutes, 6 minutes.
You're doing great.
Okay, so conspiracy theory stuff. So that's why, for me, I just knew that I had to think of it in terms of, I tell jurors all the time, we're going to get you close. If we didn't, that's why we use a jury. We wouldn't have no need for a jury if it was that slam dunk. So I think in the end, but that's just how we make decisions. Now, why do I think it's not a conspiracy? Well, conspiracies, if you've ever like worked like three guys who do a murder, like gang cases, where you're trying to you can add the additional charge of conspiracy to that murder charge. And you can do that because you got three people working in unison in this conspiracy. But conspiracies are really hard to pull off, and they typically require certain elements. You know, the smallest number of co-conspirators is easier for two people to lie than it is for 22. Holding it for the shortest period of time, it's easier for two people to lie for 2 hours than it is for 22 people to lie for 22 hours. It's just the nature of it. You know, you want strong relationships. You also want very good communication between co-conspirators. What's the first thing we do when we have three people we're accusing of something? We separate them. We interview them separately. We don't want you to hear what I asked this guy. I may lie to you later on. You're not going to know if I lied to you because you weren't there to hear it when I first talked to this guy. So the point is, you have to have good communication. It just turns out that all the things that make conspiracies possible, and yes, there are some successful conspiracies, but they have these 5 principles. They aren't there for the apostles. There's too many of them. Holding it for too long, separated by thousands of miles without any way to communicate with one another under intense pressure. And there are people like Matthew, who's got nobody else in the group he gives a lick about. Remember, Matthew's the guy who was the skeptic. He was not looking for the Messiah. He's out there doing stuff that the other Jews hated. They didn't want him in the group. Yet he jumps in the group to see what Jesus does, and then he becomes a follower. And he writes one of the earliest gospels, but he's not part of that group. Remember, the other ones, they were all disciples of John the Baptist. When John said, "There's the Lamb of God, takes away the sins of the world," they said, "Really? Let's go see." That's not Matthew. If you're looking for a gospel written by somebody who was not part of those who were looking for a Messiah, because you might think, well, I can't trust them, read the Gospel of Matthew, because that dude was not part of this group. He was a tax collector named Levi. So I think in the end, I just needed to know, are the elements there for the conspiracy? Now, look, could it still be a conspiracy? Of course. I don't deal with what's possible. Anything is possible. If you said to me, is it possible the entire thing was written by aliens who came down and wrote this in the 1st century and convinced a few people? Yeah, it's possible. But is it reasonable? Because the standard of proof is not beyond a possible doubt. That's too high. The standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. And guess what the gap is? Yeah, it's your unanswered questions. Like everything else we make a decision about. So in the end, I just wanted to know, am I losing my mind? Like I think about these things. I mean, I think about, how do we build an evidential case for anything in front of a jury? And I want the tightest evidential case I can build. And I'm the same way about this. So I do think that the building blocks are out there. Should you ever be interested in looking at this and saying, hey, does this, and if it is true, what would that mean for me? What would it mean for me? I'll just tell you that when it comes to human flourishing, even in the arts, there are some very interesting secular studies that happen to confirm what Christians have been teaching, what the Scripture has been teaching. Not forget about Christians for a second. What Scripture has been teaching for thousands of years. And so for me, that was just another layer of confirmation. And so here's what I would say to you. Yes, you're going to encounter teachers that maybe aren't speaking for true Christianity, but they aren't necessarily even aware of what Jesus speaks about certain things. Go back to the source. The upstream issue is, who is this guy?
Noelle, any final thoughts or questions or thoughts for Jim?
Oh, just that you make a good point. Yeah. And you have thought about this, which is, I like talking to you about it. And I like the unanswered questions gap. 'Cause yeah, I don't know how my car works, but yeah, I am gonna drive it. Yeah, and I also like your way of thinking. I like the kind of I don't know, the way you go about it. And yeah, I'm so very grateful to have talked to you.
Jim, a couple final questions. If Noelle was interested in reading one of your books and I wanted to send her one, which one would you recommend? Because I know you've written quite a few.
Yeah, I guess, it does come down to who Jesus is. But I think that for Noelle, and we didn't get to a lot of issues that I'm sure she has questions about. And I think that age group, and I say that age group, I sound like an old man, but I'm an old man, so I can say that.
Gen
But the
Z.
reality of it is, I think for those of us who are in the arts, especially, the question isn't just, is it true? The question is it beautiful? Is it good? Um, and so my work is shifting to that second question. And it really started to shift there with person of interest. But the first question, look, I don't know that really, how good can something be if it's a lie? So I think we start with, is it true? And that's what cold case Christianity does. That's what God's crime scene does. And then you start to, at some point, and forensic faith is just how to think about these things forensically. And then at some point you move toward the case for beauty, for why is it good? And that's where I think person of interest in this new book, especially the truth and true crime, really that's where I want to land it, because I've got folks like Noelle in mind, because my own kids are in that range of, 27 to 35, and they're a little bit older. But the point is, there's an entire generation right now that maybe has a different set of priorities, because they'd be convinced that nothing is really objectively true, and that claims about objective truth are almost oppressive or seen as controlling. Yet we all have claims about objective truth, because even folks who think that there is no objective truth think that is objectively true. So you're kind of stuck with this train that runs down the rails, that if you don't get out of the way, it will run you over. The question is, are you willing to acknowledge that it's coming? So that's just one of those things we have to help young people do. And we also have to help them see that, look, for a lot of the values that the culture is teaching are values that Jesus didn't teach. And now they're seen as, either we have to reinterpret Jesus so that he agrees with the culture because we think those values are better, or we have to reject Christianity altogether as this antiquated, controlling, misogynistic, racist, homophobic worldview. And in the end, one of the things I'll say is that look, it turns out that under every metric of modern sociologists, a certain way of responding as a human leads to flourishing. And these principles, or that's the next book for me, 15 of these principles that the sociology confirms, that are very ancient. And the more we move away from the design of the designer, the more we fail to operate successfully as designed. And so we see, it's not a coincidence that you see an inverse relationship in culture between the rise in suicide and purposelessness and hopelessness. You see this statistically. The rise in depression, the rise in crime and violence, the rise in division and polarization as Christianity declines. And so we're just moving away from all of those attributes of human behavior that Christianity offers that could actually address the issues. I always say the gospel cures every kind of stupid you can think of, including cultural stupid, political stupid, marital stupid, whatever stupid it is. The gospel actually, because all this stupid stuff is caused by sin, and the one remedy for sin is the gospel. It's the grace of God expressed in the gospel.
So, for Noelle or her friends who might be listening to this podcast
Mm-hmm.
later, somebody who identifies with some of that worldview of like, hey, in fact, Noelle's been on this podcast for some other conversations. And one of the things that she admitted was, I kind of like my agnosticism. You could never know for sure. Agnosticism feels better. So why the gospel for you? What is it that's so compelling that you're willing to step over those questions as a gap and go, yeah, I'm banking my whole life on this?
Okay, so here's what it comes down to. Nobody would say that agnosticism is the best position to take when you're considering the next round of chemotherapy for your cancer. No, instead you're going to research which approach, which treatment will actually cure your cancer. And you're not going to be agnostic about it. You're going to be very deliberate and intentional about it. And that's what the gospel is. The gospel is not, hey, I've got an alternative way of living that you might like. No, it's a cure for what's killing us. Anyone who's agnostic about a cure, what really? Who's agnostic about a cure? If you're dying, you're not agnostic. You're intensely, passionately interested. Well, that's what the gospel is. It's the cure for what's killing us spiritually. And I think shame on us if we haven't been communicating it that way, if we haven't been offering it this way. If it's seen as just another potential way to live that might benefit you in some way, that's an unfair characterization of what the gospel really is. So I think that's why yeah, agnosticism is appropriate in certain places, but this is very different. This is about, okay, you've got this huge meteor heading for your hometown, and you got to make a decision whether or not you should leave that space or not. You're not agnostic about those kinds of issues, because they're life threatening. And if you have good reason to believe that you are more than just a material being, that you are a brain and a mind, dualist, living that dual identity, that you are a body and a soul, then there's no reason to believe that your soul would die just because your body does. They're two different things. So life, the definition of life changes. Life is not just the 90 years you're going to live here between the line segment there between birth and death, right? That little partial line, that segment. It's a ray that continues beyond the second dot. So it's that ray continues infinitely. If that's the definition of life, then these kinds of issues, the gospel, are really life and death issues, because the life extends beyond the second dot. So we have to kind of think of it that way. And maybe as part of it is we don't often portray it that way. But isn't it interesting? And I totally resonate so deeply with what Noelle said about a speaker said something that for her violated her sensibilities in some way. And the things that violated her sensibilities really had nothing to do with Jesus. It was a secondary, tertiary issue. And this is why, for the most part, I don't take positions. If you ask me questions about where I stand on certain political issues, of course I'm going to tell you where I stand. But to me, that's downstream. It's so far downstream. How to be a man is downstream of who is Jesus. What I should do, should I shoot a gun at an animal, is downstream of let's start up here. And we may end up disagreeing on those issues. That's okay. But we have to at least agree on the foundational issues that are upstream. Because here's what happens. In the end, I should not be able to persuade Noelle with my position. I want her to be convinced that this is the mind of God being voiced in every word that comes out of Jesus's mouth. And that changes. That's a game changer. Mm-hmm. My wisdom has never been a game changer. Yeah. So in the end, that's where I think these conversations really should go for all of us, because that's true for not just for her, it's true for all of us.
Yeah. So 2 final questions on that. I always have the same final question, so this is my last, one. But how do we share the gospel then with the world? Because, like, as we're recording this, just not too long ago, it's the Super Bowl. There was a lot of controversy over an ad campaign called He Gets Us. Mm-hmm. Christians were saying it wasn't enough. Non-Christians were saying, why all the money? There's like, what is it about Jesus that's so special? What is it about the gospel that's like, yeah, I got to share that with people?
Well, I'm not opposed to contextualizing and trying to reach certain groups by coming in the way that group will let you in. Mm-hmm. And I get the heart of it, I think, is that, hey, I've got a culture I'm trying to reach. I'm trying to kind of step sideways into that culture. What's important to them, I want you to see it's part of our worldview as well. But I think now, at this point, at 62, what I realize is that my persuasion and my case for Christianity does not save you. It is the gospel that has all the power. So I don't now talk about the case without expressing the gospel explicitly. It needs to be expressed, because that's where the power is. Because it turns out the reason why so look, every evil that we find in the world is driven by this nasty thing we call, and we know it is, pride. It's pride. It's selfishness. It's behind everything. It's behind world leaders who want to take over more territory. It's behind people who are abusing others. They're thinking about themselves. Pride, thinking that too highly of myself and my needs being met, is behind every kind of evil you can think of. So the antidote then is pretty simple. It's selflessness. It's humility. Well, it turns out that the best catalyst for selflessness is the gospel, because it begins with an act of selflessness and humility, you admitting there is a God and you're not him. And you have to bend your knee in order to do that. And then when you express the selflessness, when you realize what has been done for you, and how little you deserved to have that done for you, that God would accept us as we are, the mess that we are, and we don't have to earn it, that he would give it to us as a free gift. that changes the way I see everyone. People who have been forgiven and know they have been forgiven of much are more forgiving than people who don't think they have anything to be forgiven for. And this is the catalyst that starts to, and so that's why I would say that this view, this gospel view, that nothing you can do will earn you merit with God, but instead it's everything that God does. And you have to realize who you are, that self realization. I think Spurgeon put it this way, that humility is not something that you can earn or you can achieve, it's something you realize. When you assess yourself properly, you come to a position of humility. And the gospel helps us to do that every day because it puts us in our proper context before our Creator. So I think in that sense, just very practically speaking, forget about the fact, the benefit it has for us, but very practically speaking, it has the power to change us. But you'd have to have the grace of God foremost in your mind every day in every situation. Like you can't just check the box at some point as a teenager and then live your life. You have to live with the cross at the front. Like if you're a cop and you've got crosshairs, right? Everything you're seeing is through the lens of those crosshairs. That what we have to do the same thing here. Everything has to be. You have to be at the kneel at the foot of the cross in every. Look, do we do that consistently? Of course not. No, we are innately selfish, which is why we need the gospel, because it is the antidote to pride. It is the antidote to selfishness. It's the thing that compels me, even in my own marriage, to be selfless. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of the problems in the world, well, that's why the gospel fixes every kind of stupid.
Yeah. I love it. I can't wait for part 2. We'll schedule that after we're done recording here. But final question, Jim, thank you so much for being on here. It's been a real joy to have you back on. The Finding Something Real podcast is about a journey towards finding something real in Jesus. REAL is an acronym for restoration, eternity, authenticity, and love. Of those 4 things that we can find in relationship with Jesus, and of course there's many others, but what of those 4 things, restoration, eternity, authenticity, or love, do you find most compelling in your life right now, and why?
Well, I'll tell you, it's the last one, and here's why. I think we use that word love, and it's a tough word, and it's also something that's almost impossible for us to do well. Because if we want to love like God loves, that's we have a tendency to think of love in almost a modern cinematic sense, what we've seen on movies, adoration. It's kind of romantic, but from God's perspective, love is it. Scripture tells us that God is what? God is love. That's not that God does love or can love or will love, but that God is love. So what is it about God's nature that is defining this term that we throw about, that we even have in your acronym? Well, it turns out that God's nature is the perfect balance of truth and grace, mercy and justice. You see this throughout the Old Testament. You see it in Psalms. And then John, in his gospel, says that Jesus came to us in the fullness of truth and grace. Why would he say that? Because he knows that's a claim of divinity. Only one being in the universe has the fullness of truth and grace. That's the God who is love. Love is the fullness of truth and grace. Now, most of us, when we think of love, we think just of the grace side, the mercy side. But there is no love without the truth and justice side. True love is expressed when you are both truthful and gracious, just and merciful. So if we want to love like God, this is the difficulty, right? I can't just affirm everything you think. That's not love. There's no truth in it. But I can't be overly harsh and judgmental. There's no mercy or grace in it. How do I do that balance of truth and grace, mercy? And this is what all of Scripture is trying to get us. Paul is always writing and saying, you guys are just not merciful enough. Or he's saying, you guys will tolerate any kind of sin. Every call is that we're out of balance. And Paul is trying to say, hey, get back in balance. We're either low on one side or we're low on the other side, but he's trying to get us back into fullness on both sides. And it's really hard. But it turns out that and this is why every time you've got a kid of yours or a neighbor or somebody who you're like, hey, this is a hard truth, tough love. Tough love is just the expression of those two sides. that crazy balance that we have to strike. And it's not like we're taking away from one side. It's God is not balancing these. God is this in fullness. They are balanced because they are full. So I think this is the thing that for me at this point in my life, I'm trying to like, how do I do that? How do I love like God loves? Because a lot of times the world won't receive it that way. If I say one thing that does not align with your views, you're going to see that as judgmental,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're not loving. So I've constantly having to, by the way, the same people though, when they're parenting their own children, they understand tough love then,
Yeah.
right? Because hey, you're going to be harsh when your kid tries to walk into the street. It might even have to really be harsh to stop them, so they, oh, I won't do that again.
Right.
Well, it's because you love them, and
Mm-hmm.
and so I think in the end we have to kind of define what love is from a biblical perspective, so we can
Mm-hmm.
do it well
Yeah.
with our kids, and then trust that if you do it as good as you can, try as best you can. If it's not received the way you intended it, you have to trust God for, because a lot of times when you say these kinds of things to young people, they may not accept it right away, but years from now they'll think about it and go, well, it turned out that was right, that part was right,
Yeah.
and then you can kind of back into it again. But
Yeah.
I think that's the thing for me. It's trying to define and then do my best to express love from a biblical perspective.
Yeah. It's really good. Well, J. Warner Wallace, if people want to find out more about you, they can look up coldcasechristianity.com. Is that right? Or they could just
That's right.
Google your name or watch your Dateline episodes or read one of your books. I have a big pile here. In fact, just because we're,
Oh,
I've
that's
got
awesome.
God's Crime Scene. That's a really good one. Forensic Faith. We got Cold Case Christianity, a classic.
That's a
Person of
classic. Yeah,
Interest,
that's a classic
my
version.
personal favorite. And then I know you've got a couple that you've mentioned here, and
Yeah.
you've got one coming out about identity, I believe.
Yeah, that's truth and true crime. We're,
Yep.
we're trying to do 15 hot topics, 15 topics for human flourishing that you discover working deaths, working
What,
about murders.
when does
So
that one come out, Jim?
May 7th.
There you go.
So that's good.
Well, until next time.